So picture this. You're a colonizing power, and you've just landed in an archipelago with, hundreds of different languages. How on earth do you communicate your laws, your religion, your authority? Well, for the Spanish in the Philippines, the answer wasn't in words. It was in art. And we're about to dive into how this one tool, art, completely reshaped a nation's identity forever. Okay, so let's set the scene. It's the 16th century. Spanish ships are dropping anchor in the Philippines, and they're faced with this just dizzying number of languages. This was a massive problem for them. How could they possibly impose their rule, their faith, and their entire culture on a population they couldn't even talk to? Well, their answer was pretty brilliant, actually. It was simple and totally strategic. When spoken words just weren't cutting it, they turned to a language everyone could understand: visual art. And make no mistake, this wasn't about making things look nice. Nope. This was a calculated tool for communication, for influence, and ultimately, for control. So let's break that down, right? How exactly did they turn something like a painting or sculpture into an instrument of power? That's what we're going to dig into first. And what's so fascinating is how they came at this from all sides. First, art was used to explain the really complex doctrines of Catholicism. The stories, the rules, all in a way that words just couldn't. But it was also a pure show of force. Think about those big, imposing figureheads on their ships. That's all about projecting raw power. And even the delicate, shiny jewelry they brought from Europe, that was a statement too. It was meant to show off a more, let's say, refined aesthetic taste. It was basically a visual campaign on all fronts. Okay, so once they'd established art as this powerful tool, what was the next step? Well, you've got to control how it's made, right? And that meant totally dismantling the old way of doing things and building a brand new system, one that revolved around two key ideas: patrons and censors. You see, before the Spanish ever showed up, art in the Philippines had a completely different vibe. It was all about community. Artisans would craft things that were genuinely useful to their tribe, for rituals, big ceremonies, even burials. Art was there to serve the people. And this slide just lays out that shift perfectly. It's like night and day. That communal spirit, gone, replaced by a system of patronage. Art made for the tribe suddenly became art made for the church. An art that was created for the good of the whole community? Nope, that was replaced by commissioned work, all paid for by a very powerful new client. Now, this whole new system was built on something called patronage. And what that meant was all of a sudden, local artisans were actually getting paid for their work. Sounds good, right? Well, here's the catch. Their main, and a lot of the time their only, client was the church. It completely rewired the whole purpose of art. It changed not just what they were making, but who they were making it for. And to make absolutely sure the art was sending the right message, they put a system of censorship in place. The church friars basically acted as art police. They scrutinized every single piece, and if they thought something was inappropriate or rebellious or, heck, even just plain ugly, it was condemned. Done. This made sure that all artistic expression stayed strictly within the lines of Catholic doctrine. All right, so you've got this new system of patronage and censorship all locked in. What did the art actually look like? Well, this new structure gave birth to a whole new era of sacred arts, and we're going to start with painting and sculpture. Painting was a huge, huge part of this transformation. You had Spanish friars bringing over all these religious icons and illustrations from Europe, and they started teaching Western styles to the local artisans. The paintings that came out of this served a dual purpose, really. They were objects for people to pray to, but they were also these big decorative centerpieces inside the new churches. And the themes? Almost all religious. They were basically designed to be visual Bibles for people who couldn't read. You'd see these super dramatic scenes, like the Last Supper or the Way of the Cross, and of course, these really powerful paintings of heaven and hell. These weren't just paintings. They were lessons, they were warnings, and they were promises, all told through powerful images. Okay, so let's put a face to this new era of art. Let's talk about one of the earliest recorded painters in Philippine art history, a guy named Josef Luciano Danz. He is the perfect example of an artist working right inside this new system. And this quote right here, it really tells you everything you need to know. He wasn't just painting out of pure inspiration. No, he was directly commissioned by the friars, those patrons we were just talking about, to create religious paintings. His work is a textbook product of this new system of church patronage. Now, sculpture is a really interesting case because it was probably the most easily adopted art form. And the reason is simple. Filipinos already had this incredible deep tradition of carving. The skill was already there. The only thing that had to change was the subject. So instead of carving traditional spirits and deities, called anitos, they started carving figures of Catholic saints, angels, and Christ. And just like with painting, we've got a key figure for sculpture, Juan de los Santos. He's actually documented as the earliest known sculptor in the Philippines. His life and his work, man, they give us such a clear window into this period of artistic change. And what's so cool about him is that he wasn't just a sculptor. The guy wore a lot of hats. He was also a sacristan, that's kind of like an assistant in the church, and a silversmith. This just shows you how blurred the lines were between being an artist and being a religious servant. And his carvings, they were made for the absolute holiest part of the church, the altarpiece. But of course, all these incredible new paintings and sculptures needed a home, right? And that is where architecture comes in. You could argue that the most powerful, the most permanent artistic statements of the entire era were the massive, grand churches that were built in every single Spanish settlement. And let me tell you, these were not subtle buildings. They were basically fortresses of faith, built out of stone and brick, designed to last for centuries. And on the inside, they were just filled with these incredibly ornate, decorated interiors, all reflecting that dramatic and emotional European Baroque style. These churches were designed from the ground up to be symbols of the power and the permanence of this new order. So, what does all of this mean for today? In our final section, let's look at the lasting imprint this whole colonial transformation left on the artistic landscape of the Philippines. And this is the really important part. This isn't just dusty old history. The artistic legacy of the Spanish colonial period is a living, breathing part of the Philippines right now. Seriously, you can see it and feel it pretty much everywhere you go. And you can see this legacy on two totally different scales. You've got the big public scale, those massive Baroque churches, many of which are now actual UNESCO World Heritage Sites. But then you have the deeply personal side. The tradition of creating small altarpieces, called retablos, well, that continues to this day. You can find these little carved saints in countless Filipino homes, a direct echo of this colonial past. Which leaves us with one last, really crucial question to chew on. When art is brought in as a tool of power, a tool of control, it doesn't just vanish when the colonizers leave. It gets woven into the very fabric of a nation's culture. So the question is, how does art that was imposed on a people continue to define and shape their identity centuries after it was first created?